Oh, and it's edited. Well, the podcast is edited. This we're trying to do as unedited as
Love it.
possible.
Yeah.
However, like if there's something major. So one woman's dog barked and she was like, I gotta go. And I let him out. I was like, oh, we're leaving this in because like
Yeah.
people need to know that like this is how
Yeah.
we show up at work.
Oh my
So
God. The other day, somebody commented something like, watching you pause our call to go to the bathroom, like changed my life. And I was like, yeah, like you could still be a human who has to use the bathroom and like run your business. But it really, it's like one of the genius things about your work. It's so needed. Like just these conversations about like, where do these ideas come from? Who do they serve? How did
mm.
they end up mostly punishing women?
Okay, well, like we're just gonna keep this at the as the
Right.
beginning of
Yeah,
welcome. Like,
welcome.
right,
Have a seat, everybody.
right.
Come join
Welcome,
us.
y'all.
Yeah.
So we get to have a quote unquote like unprofessional start to this week's episode. So y'all, I am joined by the phenomenal Dr. Kimberly Rose Pendleton. And Kim and I actually we go back a minute now.
Way back. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, it's probably been like 5.
Like the whole of my entrepreneurial journey, I feel like
Yeah.
I've like had you as a colleague and a friend, and we've been in containers together and really like grown up together, I feel.
We grew up a lot these last couple
That's for
years.
sure. And still have a ways to go. At
Right,
least
right.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Kim, can you tell everybody a little bit about like your background, your work? Like, who are you?
Who am I? How did I
Yeah.
get here? Yeah, thank you so much for having me, first of all.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my name is Dr. Kimberly Rose Pendleton, and I run an intimacy coaching business called Uncover. I just wrote my first book,
I
which is
know.
feeling so exciting, Get Uncovered. And it's really kind of like the culmination of this 5 or 6 year journey of like creating Uncover. It's now we're in our just had our third 7-figure year, and it's like really grown and felt almost like it's taken on more of like global movement status, which is like really what I had always wanted. But it started when I had finished my PhD, and at like in the midst of my graduate work had kind of blown up my whole life, like gotten divorced and left my church, and really was feeling like I don't know who I am. And Uncover is basically like the process I took myself through, like uncovering me. And so now this intimacy work, it's like relationships and self-love and pleasure, a lot of healing, a dash of religious trauma healing, like all in there. And it's really been like, wow, such a journey.
Yeah. It's been fun to watch you and like, both be in like more intimate containers with you and get to see the behind the scenes of your business and also watch you you know what the rest of the world sees too. And I will say that the inside matches the outside, which is always something that
Oh my God,
I
thank
think
you. That's like the
like
biggest compliment,
right.
honestly. It's so rare.
I know. Like talk about well, and so this is one of the things I think you and I talked about when we were planning this episode was just you and I grew up in the boom of
Yeah.
the coaching industry. Like, and before I started the institute, I was a coach and I was doing like mindset and life and um, you know, starting to bring in that trauma piece. And I just remember you and I have talked about this, but I just remember being so stinking like, and now I know it wasn't triggered, but like activated by what you were doing. Cause I was like, who is
Yeah.
this woman out like this?
Totally. Get that a lot. Yes.
I know you do. I
Yeah.
know. And I was there. I was like, who is this person that
Yeah.
is still teaching in an academic institution and also like talking about sex and love and pleasure on the internet? And like there was a part of me that was like, now I recognize it
Not
as
allowed to do that.
no. I was
Because
so
we both
envious.
come from that academic world. Yeah. It's like, oh, you can't be in lingerie on the internet. Like, definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just, there was so much envy of how, oh, this person's doing both. And like, I,
Yeah.
I would really like to do both. And
Yeah.
also, I don't know that I feel like I can do both. And, you know, I think that being in that academic space and then going to coaching, like it was like being in this very rigid, this is how you do the thing, and then going to like wild wild west of like do whatever you want.
Totally. Totally. And I know we've talked about this, but it's like the lack of regulation is sort of the best and worst part about the coaching industry. And I mean, I'm biased. Here's my cat here to weigh in on this.
I love it.
I'm so biased, but I think that you walk the line that I try to walk too, that I think is the ideal, where we like bring the training from the slightly more rigid sphere,
Mm-hmm.
but like then mix it with like our intuition and everything that we've always like wanted to share now that we're in the like Wild West. So it's like, in my mind, such a best of both worlds.
I agree. I don't know. There's a few other people that I think came up in the coaching industry at the same time you and I did that I felt like had the same level of education. And like
Yeah.
I always felt like even when you were, you know, writing posts or saying things that like there
Yeah.
wasn't quote unquote science or research in it,
Right.
I'm like
Right.
I like could recognize like,
I
and I was
see
like,
what you're doing.
yeah,
Totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Not necessarily on Facebook being like the peer reviewed data say it's the like da 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 da, but it's like there's a different texture. And I see this in your work too. And it's so important because I mean, tell me if you feel this way, but I'm like, okay, the academics need more of this and
yeah,
the coaching industry needs more of that. And it's like, okay, let's bring these two worlds together and maybe spare a few people from needing to like go all in on like this more dry route that like might not get them what they want, but they still want that information. So they
yeah,
can like join the institute and work with you. They can work with me. And it's like, right, like you might not need a like PhD in religion and women's studies. You might just need to be able to talk about your religious trauma and purity culture. And like, here's a space.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm just like letting that sink in because that's really it, is how do you take these. I used to joke, I'm like a triangle, and at one point is the woo, and at one point is the religion, and at one point is the
Yes.
science. And like,
Yes, you are that triangle.
right. And I feel like you are too.
Yeah,
And
I
you know,
received that. Two triangles. Yeah, yeah, but I
right.
know just what you mean.
Yeah. And it's hard in a world that says like pick one. I feel like the
Right.
professional thing to do is, you
Right.
know, quote unquote, not my definition of professionalism, but like
Right.
society's is pick one. Like either
Right.
be that all in, like, and like every post is how much you love Jesus and
Right.
like how good of a girl you are, and like or you
And
know,
no woo could creep in. Maybe a dash of science, but not too much. Just the
right,
right amount.
right. And then there was I was actually just talking about this in one of the calls I was running for our Sell from Your Soul program. And I was
Oh,
like, look, y'all, trips, there's a 32 module curriculum plan, and it's got
yeah.
course objectives and like
Yeah.
programs, and like it's a
We have a
6 page thing,
syllabus.
right?
We've
Like,
got a reading
yeah,
list.
and I know
Yeah.
you've had that too. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
in here I wrote the notes 30 minutes beforehand, and I was
Yes.
like feeling into like what God and the universe wanted me to say today, and
Yeah.
I'm just in front of you vibing, and like,
Oh, yeah.
and there's still a part of me that's like, oh, that's not what we're supposed to
Not
do.
allowed. Right. Oh my God. Right. Right. But like, oh, just hearing you talk, I'm like, oh, this is so needed. But yes, I hear you. It's like almost like a bad girl moment to be
Yeah.
like, I'm just gonna wing it. It's like, whoa, you can't do that.
Yes. Yeah. The
Yeah.
scientists are like, well, so what I was saying in
Yeah.
Sell from Your Soul is I was like, y'all, my sister and I did a presentation at a international teaching conference about resilience in our students and like understanding how to bring trauma-informed practices into your teaching.
Yes. Oh my God, that's so amazing.
It was incredible. And we're not typical presenters. So like she and I are just having a grand old time. We're like talking with the participants in the
Yeah.
audience.
Right.
And a woman came up in the end and she was like, "Where is your slide of resources?" And I was like, well,
I could jot you down my side research
I know.
post it if you want. Yeah.
I know. We ended up in this like 5 minute. She was so upset. And she's like, I said, listen, this actually pulls, when we sat down and looked at it, we pulled for this 45-minute thing from 17 disciplines. Like
Yeah.
animal studies, neuroscience, biology, psychology, like communications, all of these things. And we had sources in every one. And I remember we were just like, we're not going to put a list of like 500 studies on here.
Which almost, tell me if this resonates for you, but I feel like that move, aside from appeasing her, would have been mostly to like overwhelm the audience that you know things. Like they're not mostly going to be writing down all 17 like disciplines, books like, from each. It's just more like that proof, like, look, I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's fine if that's the work we need to be doing, but like, how about I digest it and then communicate it for you?
Yeah.
It's actually going to be so much better.
Yeah. And that it just struck me because we were some of the only non-academic presenters there. And it was like, well, you're not doing this right. And I remember looking her in the eyes and I was so proud of myself because I started getting activated and I could feel myself getting dysregulated. And I took a deep breath and I looked at her and I said, I completely understand why you don't like this.
Yeah.
I said, it makes so much sense to me why you are not satisfied with the answer I'm giving you. Right. I said, and like full permission to think that we are like, we don't know what we're talking about and to like throw our lecture in the trash. I was like, I can't give you what you need.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't give you what you're looking for. And she was just like, okay. And she walked away. And I was like, oh, I can say that.
This would have been so different years ago. It might have gotten in your head more rather than you being able to stand in your truth. And then honestly modeling that for her, which is probably like the most powerful coaching she's gotten in her lifetime.
Maybe, yeah. Her two friends were standing behind her, like trying to like, come on, let's go.
Yeah, let's go.
Right. But I know you've had those experiences too, because I've seen you talk about, oh gosh, if I post this, like the people from the church I left are gonna see this.
Right. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, just that sense of like breaking the rules in public, which like I don't know about you, but I didn't even know how much my identity was wrapped up in not doing that. Like, and how founded it was on like following the rules. I mean, I've always been like a smart person and kind of would like poke holes at things, but only within the bounds of, like the right time and place to do that. Like I could like in an English class be argumentative, but I wasn't like rebellious, until suddenly I was. And so yeah, just that sense of like kind of remaking your whole sense of self of like, okay, if I'm not the good girl, who am I?
Yeah. But that's the uncover process. And I can't tell you how many times I want to use the word uncover. And then I'm like, discover because I'm like, I think Kim has that trademark.
Well, better than me where I'm like, oops, I actually named every single program the same thing. And it's a little confusing now. People are like, the uncovered coach, the uncovered sure. Okay. What is this? But it's all uncovered. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's like, this kind of does bleed into another topic I know we both feel so strongly about, but part of my own journey, like with my faith and with my beliefs, has been re-examining some of what I really internalized from my evangelical background, which had a lot to say about being like broken on the inside. And uncover ended up feeling like kind of a response to some of that too.
Mm-hmm.
because I was like, oh, it's pretty different to feel like there's a core in me that's worth uncovering and that there's like stuff to do and change, but it's peeling away and maybe peeling away what's been given to me by like society and the patriarchy and like all this stuff, but that like underneath is me. And like I could uncover her rather than underneath is sin and brokenness and bad and like cover her up at all costs, which I don't think is
Mm.
actually theologically what any of my pastors were trying to say, but that's like, that was the message I received. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. It's oh, I got chills as you said that of like I
Yeah.
think so many people that's the fear, right? Is that like if I take off
Yeah.
everything that people have put on me, I don't know that what's underneath of there is good or right or
Yeah.
deserving. And I saw a TikTok yesterday and I don't think I could have shared it to my husband faster because it's something that I still have been I'm going through a deeper layer of it right now, which is the like
Yes.
productivity worth
Yes.
and so it was this woman who was talking about how she realized that like for 3 months the only prayer she prayed was like God show me how you love me, and I was like you can't pray that. Was my first thing was like
Right. Like
I
what?
was like I was
Yeah.
like
Who does she
the
think she is?
right I
God
was like the
secret?
audacity,
Yeah.
right, the audacity of that.
Yeah.
And she said something that has always really stuck with me, especially during like my deconstruction to reclamation of my own faith and Christianity was
Wow.
like love God with your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so I had always looked at the love your neighbor as yourself and gone, oh, the reason that we hate our neighbors is because we hate ourselves.
Mm.
Right? Like that is something that I think you and I both probably like we could easily name several instances in the world today of
Yes.
like, well, I hate you because I really hate me.
Yes. That quality in you really looks too familiar to something in me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she talked about this first part, which was she said, love God with your heart, soul, and mind. And she's like, I can't love him unless I understand that he loves me, because it's like they said, so God so loved the world that he and that part I was like I was just like I have
Wait a
never
minute.
I was like
Yeah.
wait a second, I have to she's like I'm God's kid, right? And so if and so she made me think about my own kids, and she's like when your kid comes like bursting out onto the planet, you do everything for them and you love them beyond measure. Like they have no value other than the fact that they exist.
Right. Like just who they are, nothing they needed to earn from you.
Right. And so she's like,
Yeah.
I just sat there for 3 months and was like, what if I uncovered all of the things that I put on myself to like prove that I was worthy and that I was valuable? And then I just got to the point that like, because I'm sitting here and because I'm breathing, I'm
Yeah.
loved, I'm worthy, I'm valuable. And I was like, so mad
Yeah.
watching this because I was like, oh, great. Now there's something else I'm going to pray every morning. Awesome. Fabulous. And like,
Add it to the list. Yeah.
right.
Well, and also sometimes there's like some anger or grief of like, I could have gotten here sooner. It
Mm,
saved myself like so much heartache, right?
right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's been, part of the reason I was excited to talk to you about this was because, running a trauma institute and having one of the top things that people report as something that's been traumatic for them being religion.
Right.
Religion was also very traumatic for me, and
Yeah.
recognizing that like for me, I had to really uncover God underneath the religion.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. That so lands. Yeah.
Yeah. And the religious context in which you were raised in is different than mine. I grew up in like
Yeah.
what do they call it? A bi-denominational. I never heard that before, but
Yeah.
my
Makes sense.
pastor said it last week and I was like, oh, she's like, yeah,
Mhm.
bi-denominational household, like Methodist and Baptist, and
Yeah.
Black Baptist, different than
Important distinction.
important
Yeah.
distinction.
Yes.
And in both of them, there was like,
Yeah.
there were conditioning pieces. And so,
Yeah.
you know, you mentioned the evangelical piece, and I only know this from my study and experience
Yeah.
of like communicating with other individuals.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear yours.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. It's so interesting because I have found, I mean, actually, I'm going to rewind even more. And
Please.
this, like, it's like laughable now to think back on this, but I really worried at the beginning of starting this business, and like I tiptoed into talking a little bit about religion and my like experiences, but I worried it was too specific and isolated and that like no one would relate. And
Mm,
it's so funny and sad that like that has been so wrong. And it's been kind of like amazing to see it really transcend denomination and transcend tradition, that like whether my clients are Jewish or I've had a Muslim client who really related, like somehow this purity culture narrative in particular about women and our bodies, and if we are like dirty or like safe, you know, really permeated, even if no one said that. I mean,
mm,
sometimes they said it in evangelicalism, they say it. And they're
yeah.
like, chewed up piece of gum or whatever.
Oh, the
But
crushed
even,
flower from like
right,
Jane the
the
Virgin. Yeah.
flower,
Yeah.
flower petals, like it's so cliche and silly. But when I think about how, you know, abstinence only funding was like in our sex ed policy for decades. And it's like there was so much in our cultural air, especially in the West. And then there's so much just like embedded in religious traditions that even with the best, most progressive, you know, families, or like I have clients who are like, I am atheist. Like, why is this still why does
Right.
it feel like I'm still bad if I sleep with someone on the first date? Or why would be being a slut be the worst thing I could be called? It's like these like remnants of purity culture that like kind of don't even make sense in our lives, but we're like, oh God, like what if he finds out how many people I've slept with? And it's like, where do we get that? It's not just from nowhere, and it's not equally distributed, right? It's like
Yeah.
women feel it, in my experience at least. And at least in my case, there was like a villain to point to for some of it. And that villain, like you were saying, is not God.
Yeah.
It's not even the Bible. The Bible, I'm like, no, there's nothing in here about rings and swords. I mean, but
Well,
like not
yeah.
about that.
Got you.
Yeah. But it's so interesting to just see. And, you know, over the years, I really thought, like, where does this come from? And I don't know if this is naive, but like, I think the goal is probably sympathetic, like rooted
Yeah.
in trying to keep women safe.
Yeah.
And like, I do understand that. And I think I kind of was drawn to it for the same reason. Like, it was like, okay, yeah, the world does seem a little scary. People seem a little dangerous. Like, okay, let's like guard this. But I think what comes out instead is like not that. It's not like, oh, you're so precious. Like the message I feel like I received instead in inside was like, you're kind of dangerous. Like,
Mhm.
don't show your shoulders at church camp. Like you will cause like riot if we can see your legs. I was like, what? So it's like, okay, even
Oh,
if this came from a nice place, it's coming out as like a generation of women who are now like coming to work with me and you and being like, why do I have like stomach aches that with no explanation? Why
mm.
do I feel like I can't have sex with my husband? I like even want to, but I'm like so shut down. And I usually feel like the Scooby-Doo kids be like pulling off like whatever it is and be like, it's purity culture. Like, you know, like
I
this,
would have
like,
gotten away with it
yes,
too, right?
exactly, exactly. And it's like, you know, not trying to oversimplify everything, but it really did do kind of a number on us culturally.
I sometimes I think we, and I think you'll get this, like sometimes I feel like we try to make answers way more complex than they are. And sometimes we try to make them way more simple than they are. And I
So
think
true.
this is
Yeah.
one of those places where like the simplicity is, I
Yeah.
think it's both. It's incredibly complex. And the simplicity is there's fear, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just, there's fear. And whether it's, I'm going to be tempted, or I'm going to, be led astray, or I'm going to lead someone else astray. And I'm either going to take myself, or someone's going to take me in a direction that I've been taught is
Yeah.
not the right direction to go. And when you think about it that way, I mean, shame is such a big part of both purity culture and of like trauma work, right?
Yeah.
And that's literally it. Like the thing that we're taught is when you do these things, you're turning your back from God.
Yeah.
And so you should feel shame because that's a disconnection. And so in order to stop feeling shame, you need to turn yourself back and like, right yourself back. And for me, it's like, if my kid turned their back on me and decided that they didn't want to do, or they wanted to like outright defy what I wanted, I wouldn't want them to feel shame.
Yeah.
I would want them to feel love, right? I would want them to feel like it
I'm
is
gonna
so
love you back here.
right. Like
Yeah.
it is so safe for you to like to
It is.
um like to make your own choices. And also like I'm here and I'm always here. And I'm like, I don't know if you know this. I taught Sunday school so I converted to Catholicism right before we got married, so like 2021.
Yeah.
And because my husband is Catholic, and that's not the only reason, but
Yeah.
we were getting married in the Catholic Church, and
Yeah.
right, and I'm teaching Sunday school and learning some things that like I
Yeah.
never learned because I'm having to learn them for the lesson before I teach the kids.
Totally.
And I'm like, this doesn't have to be taught like that.
Yeah.
Like I'm sitting here going, well, they're saying this is the doctrine, and yet I'm going into the doctrine and like I'm reading this, and I'm not a stupid person. Like I've got some skills of
Yeah.
deduction, and I'm like, there
Yeah.
are other ways that this could have been interpreted other than this very
Yeah.
narrow one. And I'm not sitting here like pretending to be a religious scholar. That's my husband's story,
But
actually.
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
No, but that's such a well taken point where it's like, this is not a foregone conclusion. We actually like could be having a debate, but probably not at Sunday school, but still like
Right.
there's more nuance like built in. And that's like in English. You know what I mean? It's
Oh
like
my
that's
gosh.
not even going into like the Greek or the Aramaic or
Yeah.
whatever, and being like, well, what did this word mean? It's like there's so much open to interpretation.
Yeah. And it feels, I can tell the uncovering, to use that word, that I've done for myself, because like 2 years ago, there's no way that I could have had this conversation on a podcast.
Totally.
Like
Totally.
I couldn't have been like, hey y'all, here's what I believe and here's what I've come to. And also like, give me 5 years. I'm sure that it will
Ah,
shift more. And,
totally. Totally.
but that's also part of this is like purity
Yeah.
culture, shame, like
Uh,
these past painful experiences where they tell you that you're bad or you're wrong or you're dirty or you're unclean, whatever. They're binary, right? Because the opposite is you're clean, you're
right.
pure, you're right,
Right.
you're good. And like the more I do this, the more I'm like, there's so little binary to it.
Yes. It's so true. And like you more than anyone probably could see why people would want there to be binary.
Oh yeah. Our
It's
brains
like,
want it
of
to be easy.
course, right. It's like, of course we wish it were just black and white, good and bad, right and wrong. And it's like, you can see why as humans we like long for that, but also totally rebel against it. And it's like the messy middle and the messy nuance is so much more complicated.
Mm. I have a question that just popped in my head for you, because
Yeah.
you and I have both been, um, I think, lovingly discerning and like bringing some what's the word I want to use, I don't want to say like criticism, but some questioning, some curiosity to
Ah,
how we've been approaching coaching and
yes.
mentoring and teaching. And I actually see a huge, huge link between purity culture and women's coaching spaces.
Oh my God. I got chills. Tell me more, but I'm following you.
Okay. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm curious because like that just hit, it's this idea of
Yeah.
people are always so surprised when they get into space with us and they're like, oh, so we really are allowed to talk about the imperfections. Like we really are allowed to make mistakes. Like we really are allowed to just like be our full selves in here, and you're not gonna like shame us or blame
Yes,
us or like kick us out.
oh my God, Lee.
But I
Yes.
felt that way, and I've been in some of your spaces, and I felt that
Right.
way of like, I can
Right.
actually sit here and cry for like my entire 15 minutes of my thing, and like that's fine and that's
I'm not
good.
gonna get called like not self-led or something and like shown the door.
Right. Like you need to get yourself together and be able to ask a coaching question. Like,
Oh,
no, I actually knew. I was like,
yeah,
well, this is my call with Kim, so I guess I'm gonna cry today. Like that, and that was
exactly.
helpful.
Right. And sometimes it's the only place you can. Yeah, I've been in spaces and I like I have sympathy for like the way that everybody was trained and whatever, but
Yeah.
this is just like not the way it has to be. Go enroll in Lee's Institute if you are coaching this way. So I just remember this coach that I had. I was like in the middle of a really emotional like experience, and
Yeah.
she was like, "Stop. What's your coaching question?" And it's like, I do understand that, like, probably she wanted me to get what I wanted out of that. But
Mhm.
it's like, I don't work that way. Like, I needed to cry. And, like, I didn't have, like, a question about a funnel or some shit. Like, I just was, like, working through something. And it's so interesting now because it's like, this has become what makes us both, I think, so magnetic. Like people can feel that, and like the intimacy work, the trauma
Yeah.
healing work. It's like you just can't, in my opinion, approach it that way of like, we will heal this trauma for, like at this time, and then we will move here and we will go
Oh,
and
yeah.
then if you're not done with step two, you're like, I mean, it doesn't work that way in our fields. And like what
No.
we're I feel like it's more of that like deep spiraling and the weaving and like okay, oh, that piece that wasn't ready to come out before, but here it is. And so
Hmm.
just like seeing a little bit of what we don't want in order to help see like A, what's needed in this space, B, I hate to say this, but a steady stream of clients who are like recovering from some of these other
Oh
places
my gosh. I can't tell.
are
Oh,
like,
I'm
my
like,
God.
yeah, you and I are both just
If they
it.
even stay in the industry at all, right? Because like sometimes they're so burned that it's like, okay, coaching isn't safe. And I'm like, I get it.
Yeah, there's a lot here. And it's interesting because like part of me, I think the purity culture piece tells us that I just got off a call of like with brilliant humans who are like, well, I don't have a certification for this. I don't have, I'm like, oh my gosh, your entire life is a freaking
Yes.
certification. Like,
Like you're falling for it. Don't listen.
right, right. It's
Yeah.
interesting because the people who are like, well, I'm not trained enough are typically the ones that have more than enough training, and the ones that
Yeah.
aren't
None of the
trained
right people
enough,
are worried about their
right?
training.
we
Yes.
we actually we talked about this. We might have talked about this on a recent episode. We were talking about like the Dunning-Kruger effect. Are you familiar with this?
No, tell
Okay.
me.
So TLC was actually teaching me about this the other day. He was like, look,
Yeah.
people who are not good at things think they're better at them or know more about them than they do. And people who are really good and really knowledgeable at
My
things think
God.
that
Yeah.
they are more in like the middle.
Because they know how much there is to know,
Mhm.
probably.
Yep, you hit it. And so I think that
Totally makes sense.
the people who think they know more than they do are usually often the loudest as well, and they're the
Yes.
most confident. And so they
Yes.
sound
Stop it.
right. They
Yes.
sound like super, yeah, like this is who you follow. And I when I go back and listen to myself talk, I'm constantly hearing myself be like, look, y'all do not need to believe me. Like, I could be wrong.
Right. You're
Like,
piling on all the caveats and like citing every other source they could go to. Right.
no, and
Right.
part of me wants to take that out, and then part of me is like, no, actually, let's keep that in, because if I think that actually validates the fact that I, right. But there's a
Yeah.
part of me that's like, why am I like that? And I'm like, well, it's because
Yeah. Know how
I know
much.
there's so much little, like, or so little that I know.
Yes. I think this also, it feels like an academia hangover too, where it's like the most brilliant minds have access to like all their colleagues and they know
Yeah.
all like just how much there is. And it's like, they would never, it's like they know so much that they don't need to prove anything. And so that's like not part of how they would present.
Yeah.
But B, yeah, like they know there's so much more knowledge that they don't know. And it's like so humbling to remember that.
Right. That's really just been such a kind of going back to like my own spiritual journey. It's before it scared the heck out of me that I didn't know the answers. And now I'm kind of like, oh, it actually feels great to be like, I
Yes.
think this is what it is. And also,
Yeah.
like, maybe not. I don't know.
Yes. Yes. I know what you mean. Like that attachment to the hubris of like knowing the one right way is like melting a bit.
Yeah, and I know that there's some people whose like butt cheeks probably just clenched as they heard me say that, because like, and
Totally.
if you're like, no, like there's a right way,
Yeah.
I love that for you.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
everyone, everyone's allowed to have that sense of certainty. My certainty is just like, I know there's something, and this is how I connect with it, and this is where I feel like I get
Yeah.
the most, I have the most uh glimmers, we call them glimmers, of like coincidences that just couldn't be coincidences because they're just so divinely
Yeah.
placed. And thinking about the purity culture piece too around the coaching industry, I think that part of this is like purity culture, when you really get in the underbelly of those environments, is not pure. Like
Yes.
there's so much harm,
Yeah.
and like I want to use their words, not mine, like impropriety, sin, like those types of things in underneath.
Yeah.
And I can't count the amount of times I've heard from people in the coaching industry. They're like, oh my gosh, when you got, which is why I wanted to give you that compliment at the beginning of like, it looks on the inside the same way it looks on the outside. Cause you get underneath some people's in their business, y'all, the tea Kim and I could spill.
I think not. Yes. Yeah, that's a different podcast, but I would listen.
I know, right? I'm not gonna spill it, but I would drink it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
but yeah, I there's like a little part of me that actually really enjoys knowing.
Just gonna close my office door, but
Oh
keep
yeah,
going.
please. There's a part of me that just enjoys knowing like uh some of the gossip, because I don't know why. Maybe I feel a little special knowing the behind the scenes, and
Yeah.
like that's a very human part of me that I just own. And like the other part is like when you can go online and like look and go, this isn't even close.
Right. Right. Even sometimes day of, like, I just heard them say this in a
Yeah.
private container, and now I'm seeing this in their public feed,
Yeah.
and it's like wildly different. And it just leaves you feeling, I think, unsafe because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, what is real?
Yeah. Yeah. And I I hear from people sometimes, and I'm curious if you hear this, like they're like, oh, you really enjoy sharing the mess. And I'm like, I do not. Like,
Totally.
I do not enjoy getting on
I
here and
had to
being like,
practice this shit.
right,
Yeah.
like,
Oh
like
my God.
it is not
Totally.
fun for me to tell y'all that like last year, like part of the reason we sold our house was because like money got tight, and also we had a multi six-figure year. I learned a
Right.
lot of things
Like
about
things can
business,
be
like,
true at once. Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
and I just couldn't, I could not stomach the idea of being like, oh, we made almost 300 grand and people not knowing that we were still like that, like our profit was like 15% just because of where things were. And my ego wanted to hide that so bad because of purity culture. It was like, well, you know, people aren't going to want to work with you.
Perfect.
Yeah. And so I don't enjoy it. It's just the only way.
Totally.
Right. Like it's the only way I know to like not buy into that.
I could not agree with this more. And I think that I saw that you had seen a post that I just put up that's kind of similar about like just patterns I noticed even when we were making literally $1 million. And I was so messed up about my own money stuff still that I was basically like giving it all away, which like if that comes from a good place, that's great. Like love it. But when it comes from like, oh my God, dirty, contaminated, I can't be this girl. I'm the missionary who's sleeping on the floor of the church in Cambodia. I can't be making $1 million. Here, you take it. And like, you know, I think there are like worse things that I could have done, but still I look back and I'm like, it's not a great look to be making a lot of money and not have any left and not have like, you know, a good friend like, and it might have taken this to like kind of wake me up to my patterns, to be totally honest. But a good friend asked to borrow money, I think, assuming because they knew how much I was making, but that wouldn't be a problem. And I literally was like, I don't have it. I am so sorry. And it was like, kind of a good wake up call to be like, okay, Kim, you single-handedly probably can't undo the harms of capitalism by just like giving your team bonuses and buying more coaching. Like just so that you personally don't keep anything. Like nobody is winning here. And like you're actually in avoidance. And partly it's still that purity culture nonsense of like, what could make me dirty? Oh, being rich. I can't be one of those people.
You know what's so funny? I'm just processing that like my story was similar and not from the place of I have to give it all away. From the place of I actually am so motivated by getting to a certain point of sufficiency for myself and then having more to give away. Like that is so like just it turns me on and gets me so excited. I'm like, oh, now I want to make 100K months. Like now I want to do it. Right. And one of my she actually went through our teacher training program and I've been in her containers as well. Her name's Amber Dancy. She's a human design and also like business strategist expert. And so like she asked me a question and she was like, Lee, like what feels dangerous about that? And you'd think on the surface, like it's dangerous to give away money. Like that doesn't even make sense.
Right.
What it is that in my upbringing, humility, right? So people can't know.
Oh my God, totally.
Like they can't know that you're helping. Like it has to be done without people seeing it. And so the idea of helping people and like having it be a business, like donating to a nonprofit and having it be a tax write-off, like telling people about what you got to do, that was not okay.
No. This makes it about you. Yes. Okay, that totally lands.
Well, then the other part was and this is something actually that really triggered shame in me that I know was not the intent. But I remember the first time that I said, oh my gosh, I had a $70,000 sales month and I had a really close relative be like, you can't put that out. You're going to get like, somebody's going to come rob you. And I was like, first of all, I don't have the $70,000 under my bed, but like, whatever.
It's not in a like bag with a dollar sign on it. My bed.
I remember feeling, it felt the same as like, well, now if people know how much money you make and they come for you, it's your fault. It's the same, and that's purity culture. If your skirt is too short,
was she wearing?
Right. And I actually
with someone else.
Yeah. And I said that. I was really angry and I said, this
Oh,
feels the same as if you blame
oh,
a woman for her skirt being too short. And I upset this person so much. Like I really hurt them. And it wasn't my intent. And also like I still stand behind the
yeah. You're like,
idea.
I mean, it was a solid point. It hurt me
Right.
as it landed, but also,
Right.
yeah,
And yeah, I just said it from this anger place because this person was
yeah,
trying to protect me. They were like,
right.
look, I want to keep you safe.
Oh, yeah. This could be me and my mom. I completely, about both
Right.
topics, but yeah, like I completely resonate with that. And sometimes it's like, even when you're right, which in this case, I
Yeah.
totally were, but like, it's like that ire is coming back and it's like, oh, I'm fighting with a part of me, not you, actually. I mean, you're a
Yeah.
stand-in for it, you're mirroring it, but
Yeah.
this is like me versus me right now. And so
Yeah.
there's extra heat there that like, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. It's been really interesting just noticing the patterns and like, and I
Yeah,
was like, okay, so what I'm doing instead is not allow every time I get myself to a place of sufficiency, I'm taking myself back out of the game.
totally.
And now that's been the work of like the last year is going like, okay, how do you
Yeah,
bring in enough for
right.
you and then also like then start to do these other things and trust that you're going to be safe.
Yeah. The safety. I mean, first, there's so many things I love about the fact that we're having this conversation right now, but one of them is the evidence that you can be making six figures, you can be making multiple six figures, you can be making seven figures, and like the money, fear, and stuff and wounds not only still come up, but in my experience, they're amplified. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, not only are all my mistakes happening on a bigger scale now, but I'm seeing my patterns and I'm seeing the echoes and the desire. Really, it's the same old stuff about like, I want to be good. I wanted to be the good boss. I wanted to be the good girl. I wanted people to look at my business and think, like, okay, she's making money, but she's still good. And it's like, maybe I dismantled the hold that that had on me in sex and intimacy, but I hadn't looked at it over here in
Mm-hmm.
leadership and in business. And so it's so interesting to think about like, can I pull out the values? Because I'm so with you. It's like, we don't want to just like stop giving. Like, that's
Right.
not the vibe. But like, can it come from a place of genuine overflow? There's so much. I'm so safe. Here's more for you, more for everybody, rather than where I was, which I think was a little more like, let me pay this penance for
Mm.
my price of being successful. And also, please don't be mad at me. And also, I swear I'm still a good girl. And it's like, whoa, that shit is not CEO behavior,
Oh,
ma'am.
gosh. I know it's there was like some damsel stuff in there for me too of like I would take myself back out and then I would like get to then I'd have to ask for rescuing and then I could like make
Oh,
myself wrong and
yes, that was a huge dynamic with me and Nick because I
oh
am
yeah.
in a position where our business brings in most of the money that our household uses. And I realized, like, oh, if I go into like, oh no, he has something to like step in and rescue. And I was
Yeah.
like, can we play with this dynamic in maybe a more fun way? Like, I think, oh, like, I don't have to actually do it this way. So yeah, really interesting. One second.
Yeah.
What's in at this time? Oh, you can take them away. Yeah. Thank you so much. And the cat snuck back in.
I love it.
Um,
Um
yeah, it's so astute to hear you say that, and it so resonates. Just this like old patterning, and almost to compensate. I mean, you tell me if this resonates,
yeah.
but like I feel like as our power grew and as our presence was growing and we were actually getting like better and better at our craft and what we do and our businesses are growing, it's like the temptation to damsel it up over here is like compensatory,
Mhm.
let me
Yeah.
like, okay, like, yes, I'm powerful, but like, look, I still need rescuing rather than resourcing.
You know, so TLC, my husband and I, like, we've been on such an interesting journey this last year. And a lot of it was, you know, both self-intimacy and like, how do we release codependency and like really create a more interdependent relationship, and, you know, damseling and like needing rescued by your knight in shining armor in whatever ways, like that's very codependent behavior, right? And you know, one of the things that has been fascinating for me, and part of it was going sober, because you want to talk about uncovering.
Girl, I'm right there
I
with
know
you.
you.
Yeah.
I know you are. And like, it has
Yeah.
been, it has been really fascinating to be like, so yesterday, I fell asleep on the couch and woke up, and like, this is such a random example, but like, my husband and son were in the kitchen, and I was like, hey, can you grab that ice cream that I really like? Like, could you hand that to me? They're like, we can't find it. And I'm like, I have a photographic memory. So I was like, it's on the second shelf, tucked
Like
away in the back,
quadrant
yellow
two
container. Right,
upper left.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my husband opens it, and there's like half a bite left. Now I know I did not finish this.
Yeah.
One of my big things that I have been really working through is like resource guarding around food, because and I really, I think it is like a generational ancestral thing.
Sure.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
like, our family is like, you label your stuff, you never eat someone else's. And like, this, my family of origin, and TLC's family was the exact opposite. So
Sure.
I've just woken up, I'm mad, and I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? I'm like, who ate it? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, somebody had to, because like I didn't. And he was like, are you really gonna get this mad about this right now? And I was like, and before I would have like absolutely lost my shit.
Totally. Like that is not actually something that helps for most people, that
Right.
question.
Right. And instead I just like sat there.
Yeah.
And I sat there, and I like was like, am I really gonna get this mad about this? And
Yeah.
then so I was like so proud of myself. Then my husband came over, and I was like, hey, I'm really sorry. I just like, that really bothered me. And you know, we had kind of been, he's also sober. So like, there's been some conversations that like, we're just like kind of learning how to talk to each other again. And I want to be so clear, because I think people think, they hear me talk about this and they're like, oh my gosh, like what were y'all? I'm like, we weren't binging it up, y'all.
Right. Right. But people
I
don't realize how even the kind of normal amount is like keeping us from this status you're
Yes.
in. Yeah.
Yes. I have been very surprised. And so like, I remember apologizing to him, and he was like, look, and he still seemed kind of distant.
Yeah.
And I was like, are you still mad? Like, what, like, why are
Yeah.
you mad? And I kind
Yeah.
of poked, and he said, pretty sternly, you know, he was like, look, I just don't understand why we're having a 10-minute conversation around ice cream that has been in the freezer for weeks that you didn't eat, and you like keep your food separate. And like, if anybody touches it, it's like a really big deal. Like, he's like, I just don't understand. If it was that important, you would have eaten it weeks ago. And he
Mm,
walked away. And I kid you not, I sat on the couch in a huge, like, I've started calling them shame waves, because I'm not like spiraling down into it, but I was like feeling it, like crest and come down and crest and come down. And I heard my brain saying something. I don't even know if you can say this on YouTube, but it was like, I heard, you're a stupid, selfish C word. And
mm,
my brain kept saying it.
gosh.
And I was like, why am I talking about myself like this?
Right.
And
Right.
then I realized, well, you're asking that in a really, you're judging
Yeah.
the shame. So you're shaming yourself for
Yeah.
shaming yourself. And so I just realized,
Compounding
like,
shame.
yeah. And so I
Yeah.
just kind of like came up out of one layer, and then sat there for a
Yeah.
minute, and then came up out of another layer. And then after about 25 minutes, I went over and I walked over to my husband cooking in the kitchen, and I looked at him and I said, hey, you know what you're helping me realize is I've been resource guarding because I am telling myself a story that there's not sufficiency, and I don't want to tell myself that story anymore. So I'm going to put the stuff that like I've kept to the side in the cupboard. If somebody eats it, they eat it. It's not a big deal. I said,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry I made such a big deal about something that I've been in there for weeks. And he was like, what?
This
Like,
reaction. Yeah.
he was like,
Yes.
I don't. And I said, also, that part of me, that inner fight part, that first level of shame, she still wants to fight a little bit. And that deep, there's something wrong with me, like little kiddo version of me still wants to damsel a little. And I'm noticing that. So I'm going to go back and like take some space until they're not trying to.
Till they're not trying to run this show.
Yeah. And then we had a really beautiful conversation, you know, an hour later. And it just like, I was like, this is, I bring that up because I did not know how to like this idea that I was bad and wrong.
Yeah.
That I was a burden, that like I was selfish, that I was all these things, like those ideas. That's what I thought was at the core.
Yes.
But those were just like, that was like the stickiest layer on top of the core.
Oh my God. Totally makes sense. Yeah.
And so the work that like his work has looked very different than mine.
Okay. Tell me. So interesting to hear that.
You know, he's his work's like a lot more external, you know, he's like going out and doing things and like thinking while he's doing things versus like I'm journaling and
you're more like inward.
It's been also he doesn't want to talk about his feelings.
Fair.
Right. And I have talked to a lot of men now in our institute and they're like, I want to be able to feel my feelings. I need space to feel my feelings with you. And if I want to share them, like
I want
rarely
to do that, but I might not take it.
He's like, but the vast majority of time, like, I don't want to talk about my feelings with you. Okay. And I'm like, well, that's interesting because all I want to do is talk about my feelings.
Have a seat. I have a lot.
So there's also been that of like, I feel really guilty around this was a story. I'm taking up so much of his time because I'm just like vulnerably sharing and he's just listening, but then he's not talking back. And so like, I should try to like pull stuff out of him.
Totally. When actually he's like, this is ideal.
Right. But I was taught, you know, that we've like shamed men out of their feelings, and so we need to give them all the space to process their feelings. Even my 11-year-old son, I'm like, how did that feel? And he's like, bad. And I'm like, okay, great. He's like, just bad. He's like, I'm gonna go play some baseball and like work
like
out.
I'm gonna go get it out.
Cool, dude, see ya.
Totally.
I'm curious like how that's looked for you and Nick, because I mean you two have done a lot of.
I have a lot of feelings. Totally astute. I mean, it's so interesting too because unlike you guys, he's like not in this work. And I used to sort of judge that actually, or like maybe not judge, but I felt jealous of couples where it was like some of my good friends, like they co-lead their retreats and like it's such like a part of their relationship. But I've come to really, really value like the way that Nick brings kind of like a steadiness. And it sounds like there's some parallels in your marriage too, where I'm like, my feeling, I can be kind of like, I'm up here, do. Oh, for everybody just listening to the podcast, I'm waving my arms wildly. And then he is this like steady, straight line. Like sometimes I even think of him like holding the strings and I'm like these balloons like bopping all around. And it's like, I don't feel held back, which I definitely have in past relationships, but I do feel held. And like, there is that feeling of like stability and like what feels to me kind of like a masculine like presence, though I think like we could call it anything, of just this like steady rock energy. But it's not the same as like you and me being able to sit here and talk for hours about like our thoughts and feelings. Like it is more of like a felt experience instead. And that has been interesting to get kind of like not only to get used to, but to like value it the same way that I would like my girlfriends, like pouring out their heart. And I'm like, oh, okay, we're connecting, like realizing over here, like, oh, like this too is connection. I'm just like judging it because it doesn't look exactly the same. And that's been like powerful for me.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, you and we, I don't know if you know, like TLC's really kind of come out of the business more and has really, what I'm loving is we actually had a conversation about 4 to 6 weeks ago. So we moved in August and TLC started looking for jobs. He was like, you
Okay.
know, I
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
really
No,
like,
I didn't know this
yeah,
actually. Yeah, I wonder if now we're even more
right.
parallel.
I think we are because
Yeah.
he started looking for jobs because he's like, look, I don't want to be your employee.
Right.
And also, I don't want to be a CEO and like co-lead stuff with you.
Right.
And I was
Right.
like, okay. So
Yes.
he started looking for jobs because we still kind of had this, and I think it is purity culture, like this and polarity and like all this, all the black and white stuff that said, hey, you know, the guy needs to provide and protect, and like the woman, like she should be in
Yeah.
her business because she wants to, not because she needs to. And so that we were like 90% of the way good, right? And then he's looking for jobs and we're just like, I'm like, oh, this is reminding me of 19 years ago when I'm working as a nurse. He's
Okay.
working and he's making what I make in an hour in 10 hours.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so he legit loves
Yeah.
doing everything around the house. Like he's a better cook. He's really
Yeah.
good at like scheduling kid activities and like taking care of everything. Like the cars, like he knows when the oil, like he knows everything. And I'm sitting here going, okay, if everything is handled at home, is that another form of having everything I need to be able to do what I want to do?
My God, totally. And being held in that way. And honestly, provided for,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah.
there's
And
a
yeah.
version of that like maybe wouldn't be legible to my purity culture past, but like is so legible to me now where I'm like, that is some deep provision, actually, like having that holding us underneath.
Okay. So I used to have really bad anxiety. And, you know, doing the trauma work that I did really released a lot of it. And there was still this low level, just, and I couldn't explain it, just terror, uncertainty all the time. And since, you know, TLC's really stepped into like, look, I do want to be the leader of our house. And that doesn't mean that like you're subjugated to me and the kids are
Right,
subjugated to me.
right.
Um,
Yes.
you know, I heard this described the other day. They were like, leadership of a man who is completely devoted to the humans he is leading feels like a gift.
Yeah. It's not tyranny. It's
No.
like service, actually.
Right, right.
The
And
deepest level of it.
yeah, there are so many things he does. Um, you know, one of the things for me that was really stressful for a while was coming downstairs in the morning at 6 a.m. The kitchen would be dirty. And
Wow.
like that just would just start me in such a space. And now it's like every day I come, like the last thing he does before he goes to bed is he cleans the kitchen because he knows how
It's
important that is.
yeah.
Right. He knows that that's the first thing I'm going to see when I wake up.
Oh,
And like, that is not, I think in today's society, with, you know, really, it's very hard to survive on the
one.
incomes that we have. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah.
like, this idea that him doing what he's doing so that I can fully dive into this thing that does bring us money, like he's actually the reason why money's coming in because I'm so
I
stinking relaxed.
well understand that. And especially as someone with ADHD and a like neurodivergent entrepreneur, I know for me, it takes me out in a way that is almost hard to explain if I have to
Yeah.
do some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Like especially things like executive functioning tasks that I'm like not that great with anyway. It's like you don't necessarily it's not like a direct kind of math equation, but it's like that 10 minutes could cost us like $20,000 because the focus is gone and the posts I would have written and the emails. It's like so funny. And it doesn't probably register to everybody outside
Yeah.
of this world, but it's like, no, not having to unload the dishwasher could like make a sale
Right.
for
Right.
us.
Yes. And that's been recently, me reaching into kind of like really what what do I need like at that deeper level. And
Yeah.
we used to spend time together like during the day. And I said, hey, I'm noticing that me taking breaks in the day to spend time with you is actually like really taking me out of my work. And like, I hate saying this to you. Like, I want to cry saying this to you. And so, like, last night we sat down and we really looked at, okay, how do we do this in a way that, and at first I was like full in like plan mode and control mode.
Yeah.
And he kind of caught it again and was like, and
Okay,
then
good.
went right back to the vulnerability. And I was like, okay, I'm noticing
Yeah.
actually that I really care about this and I want you to know that I care about it. And so that's why I'm trying to plan it.
Yes.
And so quickly he's like, okay. And by you planning it without even like letting me, like, even
Ah,
he goes, even though I want that plan, the fact that you planned it, now I feel obligated to do it.
sure. It's just changed shape. Yeah.
Right. And so I was like, okay, so I'm I'm gonna be quiet.
Right. How about you tag in? But just the way that you are modeling the like communication between you guys and the way that you go in and are like, oh, wait, like, what am I feeling? And like, how do I want to articulate that? It's all so huge. Like,
Mhm.
it's so just such good examples of how to like navigate these things with intimacy and to not
Yeah.
necessarily like at each turn, like it could be a fight or it could be a war. And instead, you're like, oh, here's what I'm noticing. Oh, here's how I'm feeling. Oh, this is
Mhm.
what I think I need. Let's look at it together. It's like
Yeah.
us against the problem, not us against each other.
Yeah, yeah, and it was us against each other for a really long time. And I
So normal.
it is. And I think, I see it in so many relationships. Actually, so for those of y'all watching, Kim has this gorgeous I don't know what you want to call it, but like this system what that you've come up with around like the 5 intimacy wounds.
Oh, yes, yes. I was like, I
Yeah.
want to see this
You're like,
snippet,
what have I
what
created?
she's talking about. What gorgeous. Yes,
Yeah.
totally, totally.
Yeah, and we actually teach it to people in one of our programs because I'm like,
Like the
this
dream
is
come true.
right,
Yeah.
it's so huge. And um we have a again, I don't know what to call it, like a system that
Yeah.
I created looking at the chronic patterns of dysregulation. And
Yes.
one of the most common patterns I see that I think is I'm curious to know what, once I describe it, like what intimacy
Yeah.
wounds you think are in it.
Yeah.
So there's a pattern that is when there's a chronic unmet need of choice. That's the controlling pattern. And so this is the like, I have to do it right. Right. So like I have choice, but it's very
Okay.
clear what the right choice and the wrong choice is. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
They're like stakes are high.
Yes. So that pattern plus the unmet need of like being able to show up as your true self and being taught that you need to please others. So we call that the pleasing
Yes.
pattern. The controlling pattern plus pleasing pattern, I see as the predominant pattern in like women between the ages of 30 and like 55.
I can see that. And probably, do you see this? Like, I would imagine that pattern, like, kind of served us in a weird way up
Yeah.
until this point because it got us the straight A's and the good job and the good
Yeah.
health. It was
Yeah.
like, I better work really hard to like check all these boxes.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, why have I felt like shit for like 2 decades?
Well, and I think collectively it also got us
Yeah,
the ability to work, the ability to have our own bank accounts, the ability to have a
totally.
credit
We
card.
like
Like,
needed this and like, yes,
yes.
what else? Yeah.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that I see like for those women who have the controlling and pleasing like um combo pattern in heteronormative relationships, we
Yeah.
almost always end up with men who have a superior what we call a superior passive pattern. And so the superior is like, I want to belong, but I want to do it by excelling and like being the being the center of attention, like having performance-based self-esteem, right? So like I need to win. Not I need to do it the best because it's the right thing to do. I need to do it best because then like look at me, right?
Yeah, totally.
And then the passive pattern is in the third unmet need, which is like really the one around safety. And so if you tell, I've found this to be true, and it is a generalization, but if you tell most men in a heteronormative relationship that they are not needed, they are like, great, my life has no point.
Right.
I will just sit here and not do anything and become like the extra kid.
It's not a great feeling.
It's not. And so like that,
they don't feel unburdened by that. It's actually more burden.
Yeah. And so you have this woman that's like, hey, I love to be helpful and I also want to be in control of everything and I don't need you. And this guy's like, cool. I love
my life purpose. Yeah.
I love to feel special. And also like, I love to feel needed and this isn't happening. It's just so fascinating. And I see it societally why we're having so much trouble with intimacy. And that's why when I explained this to TLC and I was like, hey, I think this is a thing. And he's like, this is definitely a thing.
Yes. Oh my God. It makes so much sense that it's like, oh, our patterns are like up against each other and like causing chaos. And then I feel like I catch, especially the women on the tail end of that dynamic at the point where they're like, he's useless, or like he stopped loving me, or I'd be better off alone, or like I'm just too much. And it's like none of those things are true, but that dynamic made it feel true because everybody's patterns are like going haywire.
Yeah. I see so many women, they're like, well, why did he cheat on me? And I'm like, well, like, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying it's your fault.
Already know. Yes,
you know,
right. Not saying that.
Right. There's a difference between reasons and excuses. I'll give you the reason. It's not an excuse. Because somebody made him feel special. And somebody made him feel needed. And
really hits.
Right. And women cheat because somebody made them feel like they didn't have to be in control.
My God, so real.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, again, if this doesn't track for you, cool. And
we've just now worked with hundreds of clients and like, this is the dynamic. Yeah.
And I really think it's why, you know, when I started this podcast and thought about like professional, what I thought about as that word, I mean, it's really like what's normalized, and this has become normalized, is like referring to your husband as another kid has become normalized. Referring to your wife as a nag has become normalized. Like, and these are all intimacy wounds of feeling like afraid to be vulnerable and of like excess, like inadequacy.
Right. Oh my God, I'd be better off without you, or like I better reject you before you leave me. Yeah, that's so huge. And just goes to show that like so much of what feels like insurmountable, like personality flaws or like conflict is like so often wounding. Not to diminish the power of that, that's so important, but it does feel like it can be healed too. Like there's hope. Like so much of what I think our clients come to both of us with is like, this is just the way it is. And it's like, oh, best news ever. But also there's going to be some work involved. Like it doesn't have to stay that way.
I want to start using that. Well, have I got some news for you?
Exactly. Right. You're going to love and hate it.
Yeah.
But it's true, right? Like it's not as intractable as it seems.
And, you know, I don't know that I would have believed. I don't know if somebody had like presented this to me in the way that I just said it, that I would have really believed it at first. And I mean, we just spent 2 years. I mean, really, I would say October of last year started coming out of a 2-year period of those wounds patterns coming to a head. And like, I what we experienced, I am sure probably 3 to 4 out of every 5 couples divorce at that point.
Yes. Yeah.
And he and I have talked about it publicly. Like, we had one conversation where we looked at each other. And again, I can see this conversation too. He's sitting at my desk, which is weird. And I'm sitting on the bed, and we're just so calm because we have not been calm.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I was like, okay, so neither of us is happy.
Yeah.
And so what do we want to do? I'm like, both of us deserve to be happy, whether that means we're together or not. Right. And he was like, yeah. I was like, okay. I said, so here's the problem. You're my best friend. So like, even if we break up, I'm still going to call you a lot. So like, whoever you date, whoever you marry needs to be cool with us still being close.
I'm still gonna be around.
Right.
FYI. Yeah.
And he was like, of course. And I was like, okay. I said,
I love
also,
this.
right. I was like, also, I really like having sex with you.
Like, actually, though, if you're my best friend who I still like having sex with, there's a good reason to try to stay married.
And I was like, and we have 3 kids.
Yeah.
So even though I do not know how we do this,
Yeah.
like, I still want to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah. And I was like, with the understanding that if either one of us is like,
Right.
nope, we can't figure it out, we're
Yeah.
done. And like, and it was the weirdest. It was the most casual, serious.
Yeah.
It was like the most casual and the most serious conversation I think I've ever had.
I so can picture that. And it's so brave, but it's also like so safe. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
such an interesting paradox,
I
but
know.
also like, go you guys. Like,
Thank
that is
you.
the intimacy lesson that like so many people just need to see, like, that that's possible.
Yeah. And I don't enjoy sharing about this. And actually, we had someone ask, like, you don't share the details of what happened. Will you ever share? I'm like, you don't need the details. Like,
Right.
insert your own details.
Totally. Copy paste because we've all got it. We've
Right.
all
Like,
got our details that will work perfectly. Yeah.
right. The details actually make this seem more complex than it is, because what happens
Yeah.
is that if you get the details, you're going to try to figure out fault.
And also try to like use that to distance yourself from your own version of this rather than see
Yeah.
yourself in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a huge lesson for us too, and why we had to kind of step away from the details and go, you know what, that's not something we're ever probably going to share. And the reason
Yeah.
behind it is because when we would get into the details, that's when our brains would try to play the fault game. And it's like, look,
Right.
as much as you want someone to be wrong,
Yeah.
I have yet to have a conversation with somebody who's in that sort of like um deconstruction and like going through the gauntlet where it's 100% on one person and 0% on the
Yeah.
other.
Totally. You're like, show me the humans where
Right.
zero blame on someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it might be
Yeah.
90-10, and
Sure.
if you don't clean up your 10, guess what
Yeah.
happens next time?
Yes. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And it just models like kind of back to the whole premise of the podcast, and like, it's safe to be unprofessional. Like, how about it's like safe to be human in our relationships? And even if this time it is 90-10 and like it's mostly you, like, let's create an atmosphere where being human is part of this. And
Yeah.
so next time when it's on me,
Mhm.
I feel safe too. And like, yes, we'll have stuff to clean up, but we'll also know that like that's part of the goal. Like, it doesn't sound like you and TLC and Nick and I are the same. Like, it doesn't sound like we've got a goal of like no rupture whatsoever, no conflict whatsoever. Like, that would be so weird. I would be sort of worried about us. But it sounds
Yeah.
like instead the goal is like, can we move through this with intimacy? Can we let each conflict be an opportunity to get closer rather than further away? And like, one of the game-changing shifts for me was starting to see, like, can I use this moment to learn more about them? Like,
Mm.
what are they telling me they need? I was like, oh, in that case, even an annoyingly expressed version of this that I wish they would do differently, you know, it's still, this is such valuable information. That's even carried over into my business where it's like, if a client is upset, like
Yeah.
coming in, like, what are they telling me about themselves right now has been so much better than my internal monologue being like, fuck this. I
Or like, oh my gosh, like I'm bad, I'm wrong, they're upset
yes,
with me. Cause that's
yes.
usually, yeah,
Hide,
I,
hide, 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 hide. Appease,
right.
appease, appease, appease. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're like me. Sometimes the fight comes out and sometimes the fawn comes
Yes.
out.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so, it's so good what you're describing. And I did learn a good amount of this in your space. Like there was a book I read too. Actually, interestingly, I can't remember. It's by the Arbinger Institute, I think. It talks about, I think it was written in the early 2000s. It actually talks about the Israel and Palestine
Oh,
conflict. Um, I
yeah.
know, which like
Yeah.
we're not, I take this whole conversation, apply it to that in a lot of
Seriously,
different ways.
we have
Yeah,
some thoughts.
I
Get the
know.
guy here. We want to talk to. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Um, and uh they are talking about how there's this young man who's watching these two older men who like come from, both sides of the
Yeah.
disagreement, and they're vehemently arguing with one another. And at the end they like smile and shake hands and like clap backs, and like, and the one guy's like, how you guys
Yeah.
were
Like,
just like,
what am I seeing? Yeah. What
yeah,
just
he was like,
happened?
he said we weren't arguing to be right, we were arguing to understand.
I love that. Oh, that gives me chills.
I know. And I was like, that's
So different.
actually, yeah, that's how I've noticed we've started, and just in everywhere in my life, with the kids, with my parents, with clients,
Yeah.
like I want to understand,
Yeah.
with like, I have a curious why,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this has been deeply healing for me because as a child I had a curious why, and it was judged a lot of times as a judgmental
Yeah.
why.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm trying to make sense of it
I
in my brain.
understand.
I'm not
Yes.
arguing with you. I don't
Right.
get it.
Yes.
And that has been such a healing thing for me with TLC, because now just him making it safer for me to show up in that, like, well, I don't get it.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like getting heated about it, and him be like, hey, I'm seeing that you're trying to understand me. And also, you're
Yes.
interrupting me, which is preventing you from understanding me.
Slow your roll. Let me
Right.
know. Yeah, God, that could be in our household. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's like, I know your brain is working really fast. He's like,
Okay, I love
yeah.
this.
And so he's just started making it safer for me. He used to say, and actually he said it last night and we had a conversation around it again. He's like, I didn't realize how much that bothered you. He used to say, you're
Mhm.
missing my point.
Mm.
And I'm like, I'm not missing your point. What I'm doing is taking your point and connecting it to like 17 other
I'm
things.
all the way over here. Yeah.
So then by the
Yeah.
time I say it, I'm over here and you think that I
Right.
haven't. And I'm like, so when you say that, the
Yeah.
sense I have in my body is that like the story my brain is telling me is that I'm stupid.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
And he's like, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is you're only hearing the first half and starting to connect it to things. And what I really mean is usually on the back half of what I'm going to say.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, okay, so we just kind of had to realize I'm a first half human, you're a back half human.
Yes.
And so, like, we are playing with setting timers where he comes in, he's like, hey, I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to talk until the timer goes off. If you
This is
interrupt
so
me,
brilliant.
it's 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 kind of like, at first I was like, are we really going to do this?
I
And then I was
know,
like, but
right? It's like we need the Pomodoro conflict
yeah.
method. Here's my little tomato timer. But honestly, it makes sense, especially when an anxiety response, at least I know in me, it can be like, okay, I think I got it. Let me like just
Yeah.
like jump in instead of being like, what else?
Yeah.
What else? We make space.
Yeah. At times it even, this is the autism part, like it hurts to finish listening to him.
Yeah.
And so knowing the timer is there, because then I know, okay, I'm listening for this amount of time.
Yeah, totally.
I know my brain's only going to have to hold 3 minutes of context, or like I can grab a
Totally.
pen and like write stuff down. Like I can do
This is so
something.
genius. I'm into it. Yeah.
And it really goes to like, well, that's not a professional way of like, or like that's not an like that's not a sexy way of having a conversation. I'm like, yeah, but
Sure.
you know what else isn't sexy? Arguing for like 90 minutes.
Yes. And arguing past each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really taking the our communication has required more vulnerability and really like asking for what we need in order to be able to speak and
Mhm.
hear, and kind of like also coming out of some of the emotionality and being able to just like hear each other.
Totally. Totally. My God, this is all so
Mm,
good. I just want to beam this conversation to, like every if I do say so ourselves. But like honestly, there's so much pain and so much feeling isolated and lonely
yeah.
that I think could really be softened if people had some of these tools, and like to hear the way you guys do it, to hear about intimacy wounds and trauma responses. It's just, in my mind, such a permission slip. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, it's not you. You're not broken. This is pretty normal human stuff. And like, best hard news ever, like, you can change it. It's
Mm.
just gonna take some effort.
That I think that's also why I see people just so innately drawn to you too, because you normalize the like what you just said, best hardest thing ever. And there's something in intimacy work, because like, you know, really intimacy, like you're starting with yourself, and so it
Yeah.
feels like it's just like
Yeah.
deeply personal, like nobody in the
Right.
history of the universe understands what I'm going through. And yet like one of our mutual coaches, I remember saying this, like, you are such a special snowflake, and also like you are not the only person to get
Totally.
to
Totally.
like have
Triggered
this
by this.
experience,
Yeah.
right? Like, and
Yeah.
she didn't
It's
mean
like
it.
you
And
got both.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember hearing that, and I remember I said that to somebody, and they were like, "Oh, snow." I was like, "No, not that form of snowflake. I mean, like,
Yeah.
think of a snowflake. Like, if you can see
Yeah.
my nails right now, like, they're all individuals. Like, you are such an amazing, special individual, and the experiences that you've had that have led your nervous system and
Yeah.
led you to react in the way that you do, that's all unique to you.
Yeah.
And you're a human, and humans, there's typical things that happen within humans. And so like
Yeah.
we can approach it from this, yes, you're going to have some differences and some unique features to like what you've been through and how you personally experience it and all those things. And
Yeah.
also you can learn why generally things are happening the way they're happening.
Yeah. It's so, that balance is so magical.
Mm.
Yeah.
What, so you started this, what is it, pleasure after purity culture, is that
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Fine.
You started this program,
Exactly.
which I am so obsessed with. And actually, the brag I had, talk about Dunning-Kruger effect,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I don't need that. And then I was like, there's still probably some spaces I could use that. And like, I'm going to just feel into like, if that's something I want. And I was like, I know that you know, before we started, like talked a little bit about like, can I like bring this and also the
Right.
other stuff?
Right.
And
Totally.
um,
Is it going to alienate too many people
right.
and start talking about church all the friggin' time?
There were a couple things about that when you announced that I wanted to speak to. And number one
Yes.
was the picture you used.
Yeah.
I was so stinking obsessed with the fact that you did not airbrush that picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was
Totally.
like, fuck yeah. And I
Yeah.
say that because
Saying that.
that's
Oh my
just a,
God. I
yeah,
can't believe this.
I was like, oh, she's so like radiant and gorgeous in this photo. And also it is her. Cause I've seen your
Right,
body in real life.
right,
Like it is
right. You're
her.
like, this checks out. I know
Right.
that nipple on that butt cheek.
But it was just this, I see so many people do that, even in something that's
Totally.
supposed to be about like, hey, we're not gonna like
Yes.
cover ourselves back up. And yet like I'm covering
You're
myself up.
so right. I mean, honestly, I'm not like on a crusade about this or anything, but I see it so much with AI too, where I'm like, one of my like mentors, it's just like every image is so airbrushed and so computerized, and she's covered like neck to toe. And I'm like, what are you hiding? Like there's
Mhm.
a little bit of just that sense of like fear. Not that we all have to be like naked online, but
Yeah.
I do think, yeah, if we're gonna be, no airbrushing, no AI needed. Like
Yeah.
you can see my like imperfections, and like let's like model that.
Yeah. It's it's hard.
Yes.
Again, that's another way I
Yes.
let people
Like
see
we
me.
understand it. Yeah.
Like I have to remind myself, I'm like, people have to be able to recognize you when they see you in person. People have to be able to recognize you when they see you in person. Like I
Totally.
like repeat that to myself. I'm like, you can't look
Right.
so different that people can't
Yes.
tell it's you.
God, totally.
The other part though was that, you know, I looked in the comments of that offer, and
Yeah.
I was seeing some humans that I also am connected with, and just like seeing the impact of you bringing that to the world. And that is a really scary thing to do. It's a really scary thing to be like, hey, I'm gonna do this thing that many people would deem very unprofessional.
Totally.
Like what,
Yeah.
like there's pictures of me on the internet that I'm like, would a university still be willing to hire me after
Right.
this?
Like, where is the line? Oh, I think it's there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I crossed it. And yet like those pictures, the way I've shown up in that way, like it that was me. And
Yeah.
I saw that, and I think you being willing to be like, this is me,
Yeah.
in addition to all these other, like also me being bougie in a bathtub in Paris, and also me
Right,
being like,
right. We're all of it. Here I am
right,
outside in the woods, but also here I am at the Ritz. Like, of
right,
course, in my
yeah,
view. Yeah.
because that's also, I've also seen you as that.
Right, right,
Like you will, I will
right.
also meet you in real person or in real life
Yes.
like that.
Yeah.
But I think that people are so afraid to uncover themselves for fear of like, well, if people see me for who I really am, they won't want to be with me or buy from me, or like, or they won't like me. And I I have to remind myself that this is true. And it's always so helpful to see someone else who doesn't and be like, yeah, okay, I have evidence also like that I can
Totally.
physically see that this is true. That like when you
Yes.
show up that way, the level of resonance,
Yes.
it's like unparalleled.
Oh my God. Thank you for this reflection. And also, like, obviously, I could not agree more. And that sense of like just being able to look at someone else and being like, okay, she didn't die. Great. I think I can do this. Whatever my version of that is. And I
Yeah.
know I've looked to so many people like that too for just smidgens of permission to like show up this way, and kind of like we were talking about with sharing the mess even when it doesn't feel that comfortable. It's just knowing this is in service to our mission. Like
Mhm.
we are not, who would it help for us to be like, I'm going to be up here on this pedestal. Let me like pretend it's all perfect. Oh, like you're struggling. That must be so hard for you. Like I'm good. It's like, that would not be a coach. Like that would not be a teacher. Like it would be so weird.
Yeah.
And so I think just that continual reminder, even though society will tell you it's not safe, and our conditioning will say like hide those imperfect parts of you at all cost, both literally and metaphorically.
Mhm.
It's like, no, the uncovering is
Mhm.
where like real intimacy and change and depth and transformation can happen. And it's like, it's why people are so drawn to you and your work. It's like, she seems real. She is real. And that means I can go be my real self with her, not have to pretend that I'm perfect.
Yeah. This is the last thing. I could talk to you for literally
I
ever.
know.
And
honestly, Black Darkness of the Day.
I just had this image as you said that. I was like, I had this image of Jesus popping up in my head of like, that's always something that I talked about, those two things, like love God, love your neighbor as yourself. I really, that's what I ask myself from like a contextual perspective every day of like, did I do those things?
Yes.
And did I show up in that way? Like, that's really what I'm going for.
Yeah.
It makes life very simple to just use that. And
like, I have a 2-part to-do list and that's
right.
it.
That's
Yeah.
it. Like, and if I didn't, great.
Yeah.
hopefully tomorrow I get another
Yeah.
chance. Like, that's awesome. But I think of like the purity culture that, whether you just think it's a story or you believe it to be what, Christians do, he came after purity culture in a way. He was like, look, y'all, he's like, look, y'all, you are making things look way prettier than they are. Right. Like,
can't heal on the Sabbath. Please get up and walk.
Yeah. Like, oh, this woman who's been bleeding for 9 years and you like won't let anybody like even get near her. She's been completely socially ostracized. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to like let her come in and like touch my cloak and be healed. Cause like, why wouldn't I? Like, that means she gets to like be part of humanity again. Like, just all of these I've been doing a lot more like exploration, sitting down. I read Esther's story this weekend and like just really getting into it and going like, we are so cute as humans, like we're so cute to go, okay, the goal is to make it look and to be as quote unquote good as possible. And we're missing like what the word good means.
Totally.
And when I think about like when I just see you and Nick and your life now, and I see, a lot of the other people in our spaces that I've done the trauma and the intimacy work, and like the, just even looking at my relationships now, when I think about the good that was, oh, I'm doing it right and I'm being good, versus like my life is good now, like those are two different goods.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And if that first good means being professional, like, no, thank you.
No thanks. Also, don't seem to be able to do that anyway. So no thanks.
If it would have worked, it would have worked. Honestly, as we say.
Honestly.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us here, and we'll make sure that we have not only like just your general links in the chat, or excuse me, in the show notes. Well, also I want to specifically put the link to the Pleasure After Purity culture. If it's like ongoing, right?
Ongoing. Yeah. I so appreciate even just the like encouragement, because like you said, it was scary AF. But I like feel it. I'm so grateful that you shouted it out. I really, really appreciate it.
I think of many of our listeners, and it's funny because I don't think you and I said the word leadership like at all during this podcast, which
I think you're right, even though that's like the core, of course.
And also everything we talked about is leadership, because
totally agree.
Yeah, it's how you lead yourself, it's how you're leading others, it's how you interact with leadership, and like what the powers that be tell you you're supposed to do, and I think there's a lot in there. So thank you. And for those of y'all who are like, this was amazing and I want to share it, reminder that you can find the 10-minute like tidbit version of this, toe dip version of this. We'll have it up on YouTube as well, and you can listen to it on our podcast, which we'll drop the link for below as well. So thanks, Kim. Dr. Kim, thank you.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Bye, y'all.